to the Pauper Players Podcast. This week we have a treat for you. We have the challenge winner, fresh off an undefeated run, a name synonymous with Stonehorn Tron. You might recognize my next guest from being in first place on the Pauper leaderboards, ahead of even Carves, ahead of even my last guest who plays full time. You may also recognize him from his YouTube content, which he puts out every single week. Or perhaps you've had the misfortune of playing him yourself. One of the absolute best we have joining us this week, Hellsau. Thank you so much for joining me this week on the podcast, Hellsau.
Thank you for having me.
Traditionally, we start off the pod by having our guests just share a little bit about themselves. So if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, this would be a great opportunity.
Howdy, everybody. I'm Hellsau. I played a lot of Pauper. I've been winning a lot on Pauper, which is what brought me to Frusile's attention. Well, that's who I am. I just play Pauper. Hi, everybody.
All right, so tell us just a little bit about how you first started playing Magic and to begin with.
So way back in the day when I was like 10, we were at the mall and I found the Starter 2000 two-player set for Magic the Gathering. It came with a VHS that taught you how to play Magic, and it was great. And after that, I was like, all right, this game is pretty cool. I had played Pokemon card game, but mostly just traded the cards. Didn't really like the game very much, but Magic was actually fun. So we were like, all right, see if we have anyone to play against. And there was a local store about 5 minutes away from me that I started playing Magic at. I started playing there around when Nemesis was released. And Nemesis was a cool set. There's a bunch of cool cards in that set. And I really liked playing them. And then Prophecy came out, and I kept playing the game. And then Invasion came out, and those cards were awesome. Everybody loves Invasion. And that's really what started me being a Magic player. Invasion had a bunch of cool archetypes that I liked playing. And fortunately, back in that day, there were Junior Super Series events for, trying to get young kids to get into the competitive Magic scene. And I was able to borrow some of the tier decks for that standard format, and I did pretty good. And then I've been playing Magic ever since.
That's interesting. I had forgotten completely about the Junior Super Series, and I definitely had some friends start their competitive journeys in that. And if not for them starting their competitive journeys, I would not have started mine around the same time period. So that's sort of a nice...
Correct.
Yeah, it's a nice bit of nostalgia I had forgotten about. Now, how did you get started with Pauper?
When I went off to college, we didn't really have a good local play group or play store, so I started playing MTGO. I started with playing like Scars drafts, which I lost a lot at, and wasn't particularly profitable there, so I needed to play some constructed format to be able to grind out the dailies to get packs up to either draft with or to sell to the bots to get tickets to enter events. And Pauper had a cheap barrier to entry. Around that time, there was a 4-pack sealed event. Those 4 packs were Masters Edition 1, Masters Edition 2, Masters Edition 3, and Masters Edition 4. And in that format, I won an insane amount. I think I played like 50 events or something. And you would open dual lands and stuff, and you'd sell those to the bots to get tickets. And you'd also open cards like Pyroblast or Hydroblast, which are Pauper staples. So I had a bunch of good cards for Pauper from that sealed event, and I had a bunch of tickets from all the winnings I had. Worked out that I was able to get into the format with a bunch of the cards. And at that time, the format was pretty fun. There was a blue-red Cloud Post, which was my deck of choice. Playing that deck was a blast. Managed to win a bunch on it, and then I just kept playing Pauper forever.
Yeah, so that's sort of the next question that we have here on the pod is, what made you stay with Pauper of all the choices that you've had, being someone who's been infinite on MTGO for some time now? What has made you stay with Pauper as the format of choice?
Well, the format is often very fun until when Wizard of the Coast print something silly or downshift something silly. And unfortunately, when Wizards does do something like that, they kind of leave that problem card in the format way, way past any reasonable point for it to be banned. But even when the format's bad, I tend to win a lot, which gives me a reason to keep playing. When they downshifted Peregrine Drake, the format was bad. It was not good. But I had a 75% match win rate with Drake, which means I kept winning and winning and winning and amassing a bunch of tickets. So I figured, I'll keep playing this until they ban it, and they waited too long to ban it. But I eventually won enough to buy into Legacy and Vintage just from playing Pauper. Drake was a terrible mistake of a card for Pauper, and it should have been banned in that May rather than them waiting until November. But it was, personally very beneficial. Whenever a card like that happens, I would quit the format unless I'm winning a bunch. And we'll talk about, current problem cards in a little bit. But I am currently winning a bunch, so I'm continuing to play it.
Okay, so I guess your attraction with formats has more to do with your success in those formats, with as fun being your secondary factor. Is that a fair assessment?
No. Fun is the primary factor, but if I'm winning a bunch and kind of having fun, I'll keep playing. If I'm winning a ton and not really having fun, I'll keep playing. But I would much prefer if Pauper went back to between, I guess slightly before Treasure Cruise was printed, slightly after it was banned. The format was really nice. I think I was playing a blue-black Flicker deck before that was really a thing. I really enjoyed that format. I like playing it. But every now and then the format kind of devolves into nonsense. If the format's nonsense and I'm not having fun and I'm not winning as much as I would like to, then I'll just drop out and I'll play Modern or play Vintage or Legacy or play another game.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for extending that answer. I definitely have a better perspective of your preferences now. And I think, we all do. Now, let's get into your challenge, right? Now, yesterday you won the challenge. It's not the first time you've won the challenge, to my understanding. More importantly, you essentially went undefeated. Your only loss was a strategic loss. You just conceded to somebody.
Yes.
Was that so you can get some food, or what was the thinking there?
There were 2 6-0s in the 7th round. Myself and someone else, whose name escapes me. There's zero reason for us to play that match. It is strategically beneficial for one of us to concede. If my opponent wants to concede, I'll take the win, and then we'll go do something. But my plan was, I will mulligan down to 2 cards, and then play nothing, and see what my opponent plays, and then immediately concede the match and take a break. Playing that match has no benefit for either of us. And being able to go into the top 8 with 50 minutes of rest gives you an advantage. You don't have to keep grinding out Tron matches for a consecutive streak of time. You'll be able to realize exactly what's important in certain matchups and aren't going to just be exhausted going into the top 8.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent consideration.
I think I lost 3 games in that tournament, other than the match I conceded, which is fortunate. It's pretty lucky, and also, Tron should be banned.
We'll get into sort of the meta at large here in just a moment, and certainly that's going to be a bulk of our discussion today, because I know you have some very strong opinion. I know you have some very strong opinions, and I can't wait to give you the opportunity to share all of them. But I am trying to do sort of like my journalistic duty here for, why you chose to play what you played, and have you just take a moment and share anything that was sort of spicy in your 75, anything that you felt was maybe a mistake in your 75. I know I spotted a minor discussion about Serene Heart, for example.
Yeah, we'll get into the Serene Heart. I suppose I'll start with just the deck. Tron is busted, I believe. I don't believe that Tron should be in the format. Part of that is it's also playing some other busted cards, but you have the choice between playing a Tron build like mine or a non-Tron Astrolabe deck like Jeskai Astrolabe. Everything's going to be abusing Astrolabe, Muldrifter, and Ephemerate. Your choice is, do you want to go really big? Play Tron. Do you want to play a bunch of counter spells and little creatures? Play Jeskai Astrolabe. And the tiebreaker being, if you can't play fast on MTGO, you cannot play Tron. You are going to lose too many matches to timing out. You have to be able to play lightning fast. And that's not possible for most people. A lot of people can't click fast enough They can't sequence their stuff fast enough to play Tron, and if you have a poor internet connection, MTGO could have a second or two of lag with every time you pass priority, which will quickly add up and make you time out too many matches. So it might be physically impossible for you to play Tron. In that case, Jeskai Astrolabe is also pretty good. Fortunately, I can play very quickly. I believe that my build of Tron gets some extremely good matchups. I've got a bunch of anti-combat cards and flickers, which means the random creature aggro decks, like Stompy or Heroic, are very good matchups. With something like Astrolabe, you could have great matchups, but you're not going to have very good matchups. You're very rarely going to encounter a matchup that you're going to win 70% of the time with a Jeskai Astrolabe deck, because you're not doing as powerful a stuff as Tron can. And you don't have the lockout cards like Stonehorn, Dignitary, or Moments Piece that Tron gets. That's why I played Tron. As for spicy tech or sideboard cards, my sideboard is mostly just blasts, blue blasts and red blasts, and then more anti-combat cards in the form of an additional Stonehorn and Moments Piece, and 2 Lone Missionaries. And that takes up 12 slots in the sideboard. There's not that much room for spice. I believe every Tron deck needs some sort of artifact kill spell, and I've chosen Shattering Pulse over Ancient Grudge, because I believe Pulse is better in this particular format. But any artifact destruction spell will fit the bill. Gotta be able to kill Viridian Longbow, and you need some way of winning against Affinity, so gotta have a Shatter. So we've got 2 slots, and those 2 slots for this particular deck, the first one was Serene Heart. The MCQ is won by Boggles, and I thought that it would lead to more people playing Boggles. Figured, well, they see it's winning, they're going to play it, so I probably want a Silver Bullet to be able to fetch with Mystical Teachings, and I figured Serene Heart would be worth the slot. It was not worth the slot. I've had it in my deck for 2 weeks, and I've had it do nothing against Boggles, so it's probably going to go. Being able to destroy all auras at instant speed is very nice against most Boggles draws, but you have to find it. You either have to Teachings for it or draw it. And I have not managed to do so in a scenario where it would be useful, and I haven't already just won. So it's probably going to go. The other spicy card is Gutshot, and Gutshot is awesome. Gutshot seems kind of specific, but it comes in some weird matchups. The weirdest being against Stompy. You bring in Gutshot against Stompy, because you don't care if you have a dead card in hand. If you draw a Gutshot and it's dead, that's fine. Against Stompy, you're not going to run out of cards. You're going to just die. You're going to miss on anti-combat cards and just get run over, or not have enough time to play one of those anti-combat cards. Gutshot is helpful because if your opponent leads on a 1-drop that isn't Nettle Sentinel, and you have Gutshot, you just kill their turn 1 play. That means they're not going to have Bloodthirst for Pit Skulks. They're going to do no damage to you other than the 2 life you paid off of the Gutshot, and it delays them enough that you are basically ensured to be able to play Stonehorn Dignitary on turn 4, even if you're on the draw. Gutshot comes in against Elves, because you can snipe a mana elf for a turn 2 Priest of Titania. It comes in against any Delver deck, killing turn 1 Delvers, very nice. And a lot of the Jeskai builds are running Spellstutter Sprite now. And if you can set up a scenario where your opponent plays their Sprite to counter one of your cards, and you just kill it, you have gained a huge tempo advantage. You get to resolve whatever spell they were trying to counter, and you killed their 2-mana play with 0 mana. And the reason to put Gutshot in the board in the first place is for the Tireless Tribe matchup, which isn't a very popular deck, but a lot of good players are trying to make it work. And having a card, a 0-mana game winner to Teachings for, is very nice. If your opponent plays Tireless Tribe and Inside Outs it, if you can Gutshot it and put 1 damage on it, it just dies. It has 1 toughness and they can't pump its toughness anymore. If you can set up a scenario where they try to do the combo, kill you, discard a bunch of cards, and have 2 counters up, and you've got Gutshot and 2 counters, you win the game. They've discarded their hand, they've lost their tribe, and they have nothing. I believe that dramatically affects the tribe matchup, which, while not a popular deck, is still playable, and a lot of the good players are playing it, so I expect to, not often, but often enough, run into Tribe to have a Gutshot somewhere in my list. I have it in the sideboard. I have played it main deck before, but I believe having that card makes it too much of a swing in that particular matchup to cut it, unless I'm adding some other anti-Tribe card. And given it's playable in other matchups, against the green decks, against Sprites, against Delvers, I like the gut shot.
Yeah, I think that it's a fantastic choice on your part. I have to be honest, I have been playing Tribe this week. In one of, actually my very first match in a league with Tribe, I thought at the time, Tron dead to rights because he only had one colored source for interaction, and I had a circular logic for 8 or 10, whatever amount it was far more than what he could pay for his Moments piece. And I went big for funsies, and I tried to deal 30, 40 damage just to, send a message. And then he gut-shotted me, which came as a surprise. So I guess my actual question here is, was that something that you've already had published before, or is that something you think that other Tron players have recognized and are adopting just across the board?
I have had Gutshot in the past. I didn't for the first version of this deck because I figured Tribe was dead, and the Jeskai decks weren't playing Spellsetter Sprite, and nobody was playing Delver except for Mezzle. Well, he's always going to play Delver, so I didn't have the Gutshot, but when people started running Tribe and running Sprites, I figured I'll bring that Gutshot tech back in. Back before Astrolabe, when it was just a blue-black Delver everywhere, I had Gutshot in the main deck of my Tron deck, because I needed space in the sideboard, and Gutshot's perfectly reasonable against all the Delvers, it's fine against the creature decks. Figured I'll put it in the main deck. Not gonna put it in the main deck yet, but there is a scenario where all the Astrolabe decks start moving towards Spellsetter Sprite, at which point I might put that Gutshot back in the main. Against Tribe, the best is when you just play a turn 1 map, and they've got the turn 1 Tribe, and they just try to kill you turn 2, and then you Gutshot them. Oh, that feels very nice. Oh, now I just want to play against Tribe and have Gutshot.
I had a second question based off of, your explanation of your sideboard. We've noticed in the Castle of Commons Discord for several weeks now that you've been on Shattering Pulse. Now, previously, I offered the explanation that, well, what if he's using that to answer relics, whereas most people in their teaching targets, their artifact destruction teaching target of choice is Ancient Grudge, because the flashback is quite nice. That still has to go to the graveyard, but with Shattering Pulse, because of buyback, it never touches the graveyard. So I thought on a first glance that might have been your answer to Relic of Progenitus, and I know that you have some opinions about Relic of Progenitus in general, which this is a great time to segue into that. But I just want to just touch on the Pulse bit. Was that a consideration at all?
Not really, because I do not if my opponent said, okay, I'm bringing 4 Relics of Progenitus and I have no other artifacts, I might put in Relic of Progenitus, or I might put in Shattering Pulse just for relics. Usually, though, I don't want to bring in an artifact kill spell just for Relic, because you can play around Relic pretty easily, either using Denrova Horror just to take it off the board, or play a Mnemonic Wall, have them sacrifice their Relic, then you just ephemerate the Mnemonic Wall and get back whatever you're going to get. The reason I'm using Shattering Pulse over Grudge is because sometimes you're bringing in Pulse for some of the Jeskai builds that have artifact lands, or that have really strong color trouble if you just start hitting their artifacts, and are also playing relics. At that point, you've got more targets than just, I'm going to snipe a relic. You have other options. The main purpose of this card is for Viridian Longbow. You have to have some answer to Viridian Longbow from Elves or Stompy, otherwise you're going to die. Having the option to bring in Shattering Pulse and then just start 5 mana, kill your Astrolabe, kill your Astrolabe, kill your Astrolabe over and over again is pretty nice. Against Affinity, it gives you a win condition. If you can just Hydroblast all their ATOGs, you don't need anything else. You just have Hydroblasts and 1 Shattering Pulse. You kill every single artifact they have, and the game has been won. So you don't need to keep in stuff like Denrova Horror or other cards that aren't very good against Affinity. You get to just bring in a bunch of Blue Blasts for ATOGs, and then lock them out of combat, and eventually kill all their permanents. That is the reason I really like Shattering Pulse, but Ancient Grudge has one small advantage and one great big advantage. If your opponent's playing a bunch of relics, you can just grudge the first one, flashback on the second one. You've traded 1 card and gotten rid of 2 relics. If you have a build of Tron that cares about relic, then I can see a reason to play Grudge over Shattering Pulse. Fortunately, my version has 6 flickers, so if a couple get eaten, no big deal. The other big reason to play Ancient Grudge is if your opponent has 2 targets you want to kill. I have lost games where my Stompy or Elves opponent has 2 longbows, exactly. I cast Shattering Pulse, and I'm unable to buy it back, or I don't have 7 mana to buy it back on the first longbow and then immediately cast it on the second longbow, and I died a longbow. That doesn't come up often enough for me to play Grudge over Shattering Pulse, and my build of Tron doesn't really care about Relic, because it just runs a million flickers. Shattering Pulse's advantages have outweighed its disadvantage of not being as good if your opponent has exactly 2 targets, and if you need to snipe some relics. Relic sucks. Relic of Progenitus is a really bad card. Do not play it. I'm going to go on a big old rant here.
Please, this is your space. Please do.
Oh, I love ranting. So, Relic of Progenitus is good against bad decks. It's good against Tortured Existence. It's good against Reanimator. It's good against some of the Aristocrats decks that are trying to loop through the graveyard. It's really good against those decks. We have some incredibly powerful graveyard hate in this format. But the actual good decks that rely on their graveyard can ignore graveyard hate. Tron doesn't suffer from Relic of Progenitus unless they are in a very disadvantageous position already. And if they're in that position, you would be very much better off if you had another counterspell. Another Dispel, another Red Blast, another actual counterspell, something else to interact with one of their spells, rather than just playing Relic and having it sit in play. And if you're playing an aggressive deck, and you bring in Relic, that is a card that's not going to kill them. And you need to kill Tron before they lock you out. It doesn't matter if your heroic deck has 3 relics in play, if it draws 2 creatures and 1 targeted spell alongside those 3 relics that you never sacrifice because, you're taking out their graveyard, you're not going to kill them fast enough. They're just going to go big. And eventually they'll find either their Artifact Destruction spell if they brought that in, or Dinner of a Horror, or just a pile of Mole Drifters and beat you to death while your artifact sits in play. If you're playing Relic, you've committed a mana, you've committed a card, and then every turn after that, you need to think, okay, do I need to leave up this mana to stop them from using their graveyard? And should I just sacrifice this Relic now to try to draw a spell to kill them, which leaves them able to abuse flickers or moments pieces? And if you do sacrifice, you have now committed 2 mana and deprives yourself of a card for a few turns, which decreases your options to maybe do something, maybe do nothing. I do not believe Relic is worthwhile in this current format. I have not played a bunch of Jeskai Astrolabe. Maybe Relic's really good against them. But what I can tell you is, Relic is extremely bad in Jeskai Astrolabe. I have picked up a lot of wins from people with main deck Relic Progenitus. Maybe they have it main deck as a Trinket Mage target. Maybe it's just there because, well, there's a bunch of ostensibly graveyard-based decks. Jeskai technically needs its graveyard to go off with Archaeomancer, but whatever the reason, they're playing main deck Relic in their Jeskai decks, and I cast a Pulse of Marasa on something, they crack their Relic and exile both of their Ephemerates, or 3 counter spells, or just exile all the stuff in their yard, so if they draw an Archaeomancer, suddenly they don't have a good play. They have nothing in their yard to get back, so they can't just run it out. I have won a lot of matches from that.
Yeah, I've certainly had Nihil spell bombs in my build of Jeskai for some time, as you noticed that, in my playoff top 4, I had main deck Nihil in that spot. For that observation as well is that Jeskai does use its graveyard, does want its graveyard to be doing things, especially because it has fewer things to do each turn with its loops, and it has fewer loops to create. So it is more graveyard reliant than Tron is at this time. But yeah, I mean, it wants its own graveyard. So yeah, I could not agree more that, Relic is a design flaw for people in Jeskai in general, and especially people choosing to main deck.
I believe that Spellbomb is a adequate main deck option if you have Trinket Mage and you want a 5th Trinket target. I do not think that you just throw in a graveyard hate. I just don't see the reason to. If you're bringing in against the Mirror, maybe, but surely you're just better off putting in more Red Blast and just countering their Archaeomancer. The graveyard-based decks like Tortured Existence they're not a big player. I don't see the reason for more than half of the deck lists getting posted have like 3 relics in the sideboard. Yeah, it's a really powerful sideboard card. It's as powerful against graveyard decks as red elemental blast is against blue decks, or blue elemental blast is against red decks. But there's a lot of good red decks in this format. There's a lot of good blue decks in this format. There aren't a lot of good graveyard decks in this format. And I just don't think that Jeskai or Tron count as graveyard decks for this purpose.
I have to agree with you there, and I do see the assessment that you have that it's definitely a 5th Trinket Mage target as applicable, where those builds should probably have maybe at least 1 artifact land as well in their Trinket Mage utility box. I think that's all spot on to me. That all rings very true, and I think more importantly that the listener is hearing it from the guy who's on top of the leaderboard. I think you've done the format a service, so I think that rant was well placed. I think we're all better off having heard it. Now, I do want to transition to some thoughts that you have about the format in general, not just about Relic, maybe about some cards in main decks. Yeah, there's cards in main decks you might want to go have some rants about.
Astrolabe is a clear problematic card. I do not think that anyone who says Astrolabe's fine is correct. I think they're just clearly incorrect. When Peregrine Drake was running roughshod over the format, the Pauper Reddit was like full of silly people who kept claiming, Drake isn't unbeatable. If everyone is playing Drake, just play what beats Drake. Not realizing that nothing beat Peregrine Drake that wasn't also Drake. And people don't play Pauper to metagame. They play Pauper to play the decks they want to play. If people cared about beating actual good decks, nobody would be playing Burn right now in this format, where it has no good matchups. And Mono Black Control would not have seen play in any match of Pauper for the last 4 years. People have their own reasons to play what they want to play. It usually isn't, well, I win 100 chests in a week with this deck. Usually it reminds me of a deck I liked playing in Standard 14 years ago, or it's what I wish was viable or affordable to play in Modern or Legacy, or I like this goofy combo deck since it looks really cool when it goes off. People playing whatever decks they want in the metagame keep the metagame from adapting, because if you're playing a dedicated metagame Slayer and you just run into Mono Black Control, followed by Familiars, followed by Burn, followed by the deck you were actually targeting twice, you're likely not going to be prepared enough to have a winning record against all those different decks. That's not to say that the people playing the decks they want to play are doing anything wrong. I played Familiars with Stonehorn Dignitary in it for way too long before getting sick of losing to Tron and just adding Stonehorn to Tron and playing Tron. But the fact that half of the people in leagues or challenges are maybe half of them are going to be super try hard, play the meta decks, and the other half are just playing whatever, means it's difficult to actually target the format boogeyman reliable. You can just get bad matchups in the early rounds of a challenge against decks that are going to lose to the top deck, but they happen to crush you. You're never going to get a chance to beat those top decks. Those top decks are going to keep winning and getting into the winner's metagame, the winner's bracket, and you'll never have a chance to start preying on them. I don't think that Peregrine Drake was banned soon enough. It was a disaster for the format. It was awful. And if they wait too long on banning the obvious problems in this format, like Astrolabe and Ephemerate, or they fail to ban stuff like Tron or Delver that are ready to jump back into the driver's seat when the format finally loses Astrolabe and Ephemerate, then it's going to be a problem. And at the very least, if they don't want to ban any of the new cards, and they don't want to ban the format pillars like Delver of Secrets or Tron, ban Ghostly Flicker. Why are Flicker decks allowed to protect their lands and have Flicker targets that aren't vulnerable creatures? Displace does exactly what Ghostly Flicker should do. It flickers 2 creatures. Nothing else. Ban Flicker. There's no downsides. Maybe some of the land destruction decks won't be horrific if Ghostly Flicker's not legal. Maybe if Flicker's banned and maybe Astrolabe can stick around, but likely not. I think
there's the issue of ubiquity with Astrolabe, where in the first podcast with Nasty, I rejected the argument of power level for banning Astrolabe, but I did bring up the argument of ubiquity, as in if everyone is playing Astrolabe, if 90% of all the decks are playing Astrolabe, then that is really an issue. And there is a precedent that's been set with that before in previous formats. So there's definitely...
there's 3 different things going on with Astrolabe. One is the ubiquity. Everybody's running Astrolabe decks. I think it was 19 of the top 32 were running Astrolabe, and 15 of those were running Muldrifter and Ephemerate. That's boring. That is super boring. It is so boring. Another thing with Astrolabe is a lot of the Astrolabe decks, if they just spike their turn 1 Astrolabe, their deck is fantastic. And if they don't, their deck is not good. That leads to a lot of, do I mulligan to Astrolabe? Do I just mulligan into Oblivion trying to rip Astrolabe? I don't know. I hate cards like that. Same with like Rancor. If you're playing Rancor in your deck, it's the best card in your deck by a mile. So the games where you rip Rancor, or maybe 2 Rancors, it's way more powerful than if you just have all your Rancors in the bottom 40 cards. Same with Astrolabe. If I start with Astrolabe into Prism with Tron, then on turn 3, my Flickers draw 2 cards. If I don't have the turn 1 Astrolabe, my Flicker draws 1 card. By flickering like a Prism or maybe an Astrolabe that I played on turn 2, that's a huge swing. And it's all because I happen to have the ability to cast Astrolabe on turn 1. And that's stupid. And the third one is, I believe there's actual power level problems with Astrolabe. Prophetic Prism was the best card in Tron by a mile before Astrolabe was printed, and probably still is the best card. Prophetic Prism was the best card in the Boros Monarch decks by a mile, by letting you play multiple burn spells and also being the cantrip that starts your loop. It was way, way better than Alchemist Vial, and you don't see people playing Alchemist Vial or Ichor Wellspring anymore now that Astrolabe's around. Astrolabe is just a 1-mana Prophetic Prism in a lot of decks. It's not in Tron. Tron has to make sacrifices by playing a bunch of basics, and also needs to have one of those basics to play the Astrolabe, but in something like Jeskai or Boros, Astrolabe's just a 1-mana Prism. It's a 1-mana version of the best card in their deck. That means it's probably too powerful. I don't think it was a mistake to print. Astrolabe in Modern Horizons draft is great. It added to that format tremendously. Same with Peregrine Drake. Peregrine Drake was really fun in Eternal Masters. Both of those cards are problems for Pauper, and I think they should go.
That's sort of my issue with people who have the power level argument for Astrolabe, is there's clearly more powerful, more obscene cards being played in Pauper right now than Astrolabe. Mm-hmm. Astrolabe is just providing to be a distraction from those other issues.
No, they should all
well,
be
that's why I'm saying that the argument for ubiquity, I have no problem with. I see an issue there, but the issue for power level is you're jumping over more powerful cards. There are more powerful cards that are a bit more offensive out there, and I know that you're essentially playing all of them in your main deck right now.
Here's the deal. If you ban one card in this format, the format's going to die. If you ban Astrolabe, Tron's going to take over. If you ban Tron, Astrolabe's going to take over. If you ban Ephemerate, it's going to be an Astrolabe format still, and probably a Tron Astrolabe format. I'll just go back to playing Flickers, and Jeskai doesn't exist anymore, basically. You've got to ban more than one thing. And I don't think just because there's more powerful stuff in the format makes the fact that Astrolabe's too powerful incorrect. I think those powerful things should go. I think they could ban Astrolabe and Tron and Ephemerate or Muldrifter. We'll get to that in a second. And ban Delver, because it's probably just going to come back and take over 30% of the format. And they should ban Flicker for the reasons I stated already. And they should ban Foil just to get it out of the format. Foil is not going to do anything good. It's only going to be busted whenever they print some busted blue combo deck at some point. Anyway, Ephemerate, huh? Ephemerate's real fun to play. Ephemerate or Muldrifter have to go. I don't think the format can handle 4 mana, draw 6. Get a Juju. Have it sitting in play for future Ephemerates or Flickers. I've seen people argue that Muldrifter should have been banned in the past, because it's the most powerful creature in the format. It's just a divination that combos, that gets back, you can get back with Pulse, that also is 5 mana, 2/2, draw 2. That card's really good, and I don't think it can coexist with Ephemerate. But I think they should ban the 1 mana card and not the 5 mana card. Pretty sure they should ban the 1 mana card when they're going around banning busted interactions. I think there is a world where they just ban Mole Drifter and people start playing Seagate Oracle, which is much less powerful, but you also don't need to evoke and cast Ephemerate at the same time. At some point, Ephemerate's going to be busted with something. Maybe some of the other evoke creatures. Maybe they bring evoke back. I don't think they should leave Ephemerate around. My fear is they're hesitant to ban the new cards, the cards that just came out, because that would be admitting they might have been a mistake. But I think they are better off banning the 2 cards that are kind of taking over the format for Modern Horizons, Astrolabe and Ephemerate. I fear that they are going to instead ban Mole Drifter as the older card of that particular 2-card interaction, and I think that would be a mistake. Mole Drifter is just so fun to cast, and he's so adorable with big ol' eyes.
I think it's excellent that you've shared all your thoughts on how extended you believe the ban list should be. It's important because that's sort of why I started the podcast, is to speak with the people who play the most Pauper. And you find yourself on top of the leaderboard, meaning that you play an obscene amount of Pauper compared to the average Pauper player, whereas the average Pauper player probably plays 3 rounds a week of Pauper at their local game store. Call it 3 to 5 rounds a week. You know, the paper player, the average paper player. And you probably play a minimum of 20 matches a week. So those observations, in a nutshell, is why I started this podcast, is to speak with people who are playing the most Pauper. I find it incredibly interesting just how long your shopping list would be for ban. And I really appreciate you sharing that with the rest of the class, so to speak. I want to pull just a little bit back towards the discussion about Tron, about the deck that you're playing. Do you think you have any bad matchups at this time?
No, I used to. Before Astrolabe and before Ephemerate, I had a bad matchup against Burn and a bad matchup against Kiln Fiend. Kiln Fiend doesn't exist anymore. The Burn matchup's good. I believe I'm at least 50% against Burn. I might be more, or I might be a little bit less, but it's at least even. It's difficult because Burn players aren't very good. So they make a lot of mistakes, like visible mistakes. If they sequenced it in this other way, I would have taken 1 or 2 more damage, etc. That kind of spoils my data, but the ability of being able to ephemerate your wall rather than burning a flicker to get back a Pulse of Marasa or a Blue Blast makes that matchup much better. And Tron versus Burn matchup frequently came down to them killing your Prism and then you never having another colored source. With Astrolabe, that doesn't happen nearly as often, and you're running a ton of colored basics. So even though you're losing the game lands, you're not as vulnerable of just playing a bunch of colorless lands and doing nothing. The combination of Astrolabe plus Ephemerate dramatically improved the Burn matchup, and I don't see anything that I consider a bad matchup for Tron. There's less good matchups. I think the extremely aggressive versions of Jeskai Astrolabe, they might have a positive matchup against Tron. The versions with 4 Seekers, 4 Skyfishers, and 4 Glinthawks, they might be able to put enough pressure on Tron that they have to keep in a bunch of anti-combat cards, and then they don't have enough counters to fight through all the opposing counterspells and stop the Archaeomancer Ephemerate loops. But those builds are not well positioned in the mirror, which means given how many people run Jeskai Astrolabe compared to Tron, you're not going to want to position yourself to beat Tron and lose in the mirror. So I don't think the metagame can adapt that way. And from what I've seen, from what I've played against, most people are dropping Seeker of the way they're dropping Glinthawk, and they're moving to more well-positioned cards for the mirror match.
What's interesting is this is sort of becoming a theme in my interviews, right? In episode 1 of the podcast, Nasty and I created the dichotomy that you're either playing Ephemerate or you're beating Ephemerate. Plain and simple, you shouldn't be doing anything else. Anything else would be a mistake to be doing. In what would have been episode 2, Birdman and I had a discussion in which he said that first, which he probably did say that first, because he plays more Pauper than I do. He probably came to that conclusion at least a week sooner than I came to that conclusion. And then, that audio file was unusable, unfortunately, although we should hear from Birdman in the future. The next interview we did with Paulo last week, right? Paulo described the format as being poisoned by Astrolabe, being poisoned by Ephemerate. And so right now we're shooting at 100%. 100% of our guests want changes in the format, which is important because, again, the purpose of the podcast is to speak with people who play the most Pauper, speak with people who are actually shaping the metagame. Well, I haven't heard a voice yet that's satisfied with metagame. I haven't heard a voice yet that thinks the metagame is in a good place. So those observations, thank you so much for sharing them. Now, we are going to start wrapping up here, right? But real fast before we do you have any thoughts on the Format Championship, because you are qualified for the Format Championship? Are you going to play the playoff this weekend?
I am going to play the playoff because I have so many Pauper points I got to use, and it takes the place of the challenge, so I'm going to do it anyway. I am going to be extremely disappointed if Astrolabe and Tron survive the next ban list, because that means either I'm going to have to play Tron in the Format Championships in January, or they are going to ban it at the last minute, and then I have to scramble in a new format, which would be extremely irritating.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's one of the things that came up in the conversation with Birdman. Again, rip my audio file, is that there's a legitimate chance that everyone who qualifies for the Format Championship, or maybe not everyone, but many to most players who qualify for the Format Championship will not have the opportunity to play the same decks, because the first playoff was a bunch of Gush decks, and the second playoff was a bunch of Astrolabe decks. Presumably, the third playoff is also going to be a bunch of Astrolabe and or Ephemerate decks.
It would be very funny of WotC if they wait for the fourth qualifier to finish and then ban a bunch of stuff.
That would actually be pretty funny.
It would be funny. I would hate WotC for doing this, but it would be very funny.
I appreciate chaos, so I think I'd actually be down for that. It'd be more interesting. I'm always motivated by interesting, so I would be down for that, although I can understand how no one else would like that. Speaking a little bit more about the format playoffs, this weekend, are you going to take that seriously at all? Because you're already qualified. I know I'm going to play. I have the same problem. I have format points I would not use otherwise. They have no other value other than to play the playoffs. But because I'm qualified for the Format Championship, I simply intend to concede to anyone that I know, basically, in the hope that they too can become a qualified player.
I think most of the people I know are already qualified. I'm just going to run Tron. I'm just going to Tron people out. And then if it really comes down to it, like if I am qualified, my opponent's not qualified, and whoever wins this final match qualifies, I'll probably just concede. The chests don't really matter that much to me, or the sets. I can't even remember what the prizes are.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about things. And certainly would understand if the list of people that you're looking to give free wins to is a little bit smaller than my list. I think my list for this weekend is going to extend to pretty much all the Brazil players. And, that episode with Paulo is, at the time you and I are recording this, is about 24 hours from being released. So you're not exactly privy to that conversation that happened yet. But I hope that, should you listen, you'll understand why I intend to concede to any and all Brazilian players, in addition to just people that I know from the Castle of Commons. So
the win is much more important for basically anybody but me, but it also could be particularly important for a certain subset of those people that it is more important for me. Anyway, yeah, I'm just going to treat it like a challenge, but it does have some weird interactions in the last couple rounds where maybe the win is just way more important for them than me.
Yeah, I'm on a similar page with all that. So the one thing that I should say at this time is, since episode 0, in episode 0 of the podcast, I expressed a strong desire to not try and win the Format Championship because I could not care less about going to the Pro Tour. That said, I recently learned that the winner of the Format Championship also goes to the Magic Online Championship, which is an opportunity that I have not experienced, whereas I have experienced the Pro Tour and do not wish to repeat that experience. I have never...
The Magic Online Championships is a huge EV, just enormous. It's going to be the biggest prize. Certainly better to qualify for the Magic Online Championships than qualify for the Pro Tour.
Absolutely. I guess you get $5,000 for showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm a little more motivated. This is me retracting my previous statement that I had no interest in winning the Format Championship. I now intend to take it seriously, just because there's like, what, $1,100 worth of prizes for winning the format championship right off the bat. There's the prestige of saying for a full year you are the format champion. And really, I think if there's a numerical value to get my interest, $5,000 is a pretty good number value.
Yeah, and if you do well at a Magic Online Championship, and you have interest of going on to the Pro Tour, that's a really good stepping stone. I don't think winning the online championship is going to give you platinum anymore, because platinum doesn't exist. But maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, MPL audition or something. All I know is you win a whole lot if you win that tournament, and getting, like, second is not going to feel good.
Agreed. Yeah, the format championship I'm going to be taking a lot more seriously. I presume you always are going to take it seriously. But it's just something that I figured, since we had discussed it, I should bring up at this time. Now, we do need to start wrapping up because we've been chatting for about an hour. Right. And I do try to keep these at just a little bit underneath that. That way they're digestible for the audience. We do have 2 weekly segments that we usually end on. Let's talk for the challenge yesterday. What was your play of the day?
Tron doesn't get exciting plays, unfortunately. Basically, it's just top deck, Tron, and go bananas. I wish I could have had an exciting play, but the one time I played against Boggles, I didn't get to blow them out with Serene Heart. I didn't get to play against Tribe and blow them out with Gut Shots. Those are the exciting plays. My entire tournament was, I found my 3 lands and I have Muldrifter and a Prism. Game 2? Tron.
So my play of the day was simply recognizing that I was sick and that I should not be setting money on fire by playing the challenge, taking a nap instead.
Now, here's the thing. If you really wanted to set money on fire, you would play Burn in the challenge.
I have Slivers, man. I would have played Slivers.
I think Slivers is way better positioned than Burn in this format.
That's so weird, but true.
Speaking of Slivers, you got another question to ask me?
That's right. Our next weekly segment is Give Slivers a Hilarious Ability. So what is your funny Slivers ability?
All right, so back in Time Spiral, they brought back Slivers for the 3rd time. And there was a little card called Plague Sliver, which, not really little, he's a 4-mana 5/5. And it's the joke of that card was, it was Juzam Jin. All slivers get, during your upkeep, this sliver deals 1 damage to you, which by itself means Plague Sliver is a Juzam Jin. 4-mana 5/5 with a minor drawback. But if your opponents are playing slivers, all of their slivers deal them 1 during their upkeep, which that's not really much of a downside, because they could just have like the lifelink sliver, or they might just have a million slivers and then just kill you. I think there should be a sliver with a much bigger drawback. And of course, all real slivers have symmetrical effects, so they affect your opponent. I think there should be a sliver that says, all slivers have, when this creature dies, its owner cuts it into little slivers of a sliver. So if you really want to beat that slivers player, you slam this creature, you kill all their slivers, and they have to destroy them forever.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. If you want a hate card, you got a hate card.
So I think my Slivers ability for the week is going to play more on the fact that Slivers just acquire things by magic, right? You just say Slivers have something, and then they have that. So my Slivers ability for this week is all Slivers have a great Tron matchup.
God, I wish they would print that. It'd probably be a mythic, though.
So those are our ending points here. This is where I'm going to turn it over to you as a guest. Of course, I know that you make fantastic YouTube content. Anyone who is listening to this podcast on YouTube will find Hellsau in my sidebar under the headline of Pauper's finest content. But for people who are unfamiliar with perhaps you or unfamiliar with the work that you do, now's your time.
I usually record the weekly challenges and put them up on YouTube. So if you want to see somebody play Tron and hate themselves for playing Tron, well, you can watch it on YouTube. There's no easy link to it because my channel name is a bunch of characters that I don't remember. So you'll have to go to Frusile's sidebar and click on my name, or find the links every Sunday or Monday in one of the Pauper Discords under content.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me this week, fresh off a challenge win. It's unfortunate that your assessment of your challenge is just that your deck is obscene, and we didn't have time to delve into anything like nitty and gritty. anything that maybe someone who won a challenge with an offbeat deck would have taken the time and talked about their matchups in detail. Seems like there's no good reason for us to have done that. So I'm glad that you took the time instead to share your thoughts on the format, being someone who plays some of the most Pauper. Those insights are invaluable, I believe, and we can only hope that at some point Wizards starts listening to this podcast.
Well, maybe they already are.
All slivers have a strong desire to be heard.
That they do. They have very big ears.
All right, man, thank you again so much for coming on. That's all we have this week.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up on the podcast is going to be coverage of the third Pauper playoffs. I'll be going into details about my own matches, about my own experience, and I'm going to do my absolute best to get someone else who qualified for the Format Championship to discuss earning that invitation. A note here to end on. Things happen sometimes. Life is not exactly as you plan it. In episode 0, I mentioned that I had guests lined up for September 1st and September 8th. Well, my September 1st guest's audio file was unusable, and then he decided he wanted to take a break from Magic, which meant he didn't really feel like discussing it. Totally understandable. My September 8th guest has not played a lot of Pauper since scheduling that original interview, we'll call it 2 months ago, and really not in line with what we're trying to accomplish with the Pauper Players podcast. He recognized that, and he expressed he did not believe that he would be the best guest. So, unfortunately, the previous spoilers that I've dropped did not come to fruition. I will have both of those players on before the 100 episodes that I intend to do this show are over. We just have to be patient. We have to wait till they want to come on, till they want to discuss Pauper again. I know that really will not be an issue with Birdman, and it really won't be an issue with the other still mystery guest. It's just a matter of timing. Because of that, I'm no longer going to plan so far ahead. I'm not going to spoil potential future guests. I'm just going to take what I can get. And I hope that on the journey, you guys continue to join me, that you continue to enjoy these interviews, and I hope that if you're listening to this on YouTube, that you check out the sidebar, where you will find Hellsau's content. Thank you all once more, and we'll see you next week.